No, always in Heidelberg. It's okay. Thank you. Oops. So, all right. So good morning, everyone. This morning, I'd like to talk with you a bit and hopefully encourage a kind of open discussion about this guy here, the Bezier curve. But not only the Bezier curve, but more specifically, the Bezier curve within a font editor. Now, if you're like me, you spend a lot of time each day in this environment. And with the latest versions of font editors, they come with a lot of advantages that make working in this environment very easy. So, for example, font editors are easy to access. I think this is the first time, perhaps, that the bar has been set so low that people from all backgrounds can access this kind of technology. It's relatively inexpensive now. It's easy to install and easy to maintain. And because it's so easy, I think that it can attract people who are non-specialists into this field. And the authors behind these development tools are aware of that. Here are blurbs from two developers. And yeah, you'll see that what they want to do is attract not just type design professionals, but encourage more people to join into using their products. Notice that each use the word create in here, in their blurbs. I'll talk about that in a moment. The technical overhead that's required to generate a working font file has been greatly reduced. So people can generally see their results quite easily and then edit those and then see their work. They can make new iterations quite rapidly. And they can do this through presets and preferences that come through these applications. Things like, suggested character sets or boilerplate open type code or certain naming conventions. But particularly with the later generations of font editors, we also see that there's a more, predictive style of interaction in which now these tools are giving you options. They're presenting you with what they think you want. Things like alignment of points or the length of points. And I think this can be very useful. On top of that, the authors behind these tools and the user community developed scripts and modules that help expand the utility and the power of these applications. So what does this mean? It means that a greater variety of people can now come to these tools and potentially work in an all-digital workflow. So from the creation of an idea and the development of that all the way to generating a font file is now, it looks very possible. It looks easy. It looks like you have great control over the entire process. And it's become very, very fashionable to do that, I think. But I think that type design professionals might be aware of this already, that they'll need a certain idea before that they can start using these tools. But this is something that I think design students, and design professionals who come from other areas might not be aware of when they start working in this environment. And that is that for all of these new features that are made available to us, I think that in removing certain constraints, what they're doing is adding constraints elsewhere. And so this is what I wanted to address today. And as I see it, there are two types of effects that in this environment that I think has an impact on not just how we think about type forms, but then how we express that later in our fonts. And the first effect has to do with the Bezier curve in the design process. So the first is that if we look at the origins of the Bezier curves, we'll see that this is actually a very precise engineering tool, and more specifically an engineering tool used in the automotive industry. So in the 60s, Pierre Bézier, who worked for Renault, had developed a system to define the curvature of surfaces for the exterior of automobiles. But there are two things to keep in mind here. First is that at the time, the design bureau and the engineering bureau were separate, and they worked on different problems. And that this tool was only used in the engineering bureau, and it was used to not describe the entire automobile, but it was used to describe only sections of it. You'll see here on the right. These were called patches, and they were defined from the stylist's model. And then using this tool, they would be able to describe each patch and then make the each part more precisely and more consistently. So this was a very piecewise way of working, and again, it focused on engineering and not on styling. We can see that this kind of tool doesn't describe form. Actually, what it does is it describes an abstraction of outline. And what do I mean by that? If we look at how we apply this tool to typeform, or to letterforms in general. So here we have a form that I made with a broad nib pen. This is a square cap S. And so what we see is that this is the relationship of the tool to the form. So yeah, like I said, this is a pen, and it's done with 2 strokes. Temporally, this took about 5 seconds to make. And when form is created, as many of you know, counterform is also created. And so in that form, there's mass and there's edge, which are made with the tool in a specific relationship. Oh yeah, and it's also probably worth noting that when I use this tool, I create the whole form at the same time. So it's a very holistic way of creating that. When we move to outline, as I see it, we're only working with an aspect of form, which is that edge. If we see here, so even though I've made this with only a few lines, a few long lines, and it probably took 7, 8 seconds to make with a pen, that I'm actually not really interested in the width of this line. This line has a conceptual width of 0 because I'm only describing edge. This becomes form the moment I fill it in. And because this isn't form, I have to bring this illusion of form. I have to bring this idea into this concept already, because the idea of tool, the idea of the broad nib pen, is absent. There's no center line of the tool, and there's no shape of the tool. So this is essentially an illusion of form that I have to then fill in. And here we see in the red the relationship of the tool, that pen that I used, on form. Things become a bit different when we start looking at the Bezier curve, because this is essentially an outline segment. Right? This is a start point, an end point, and then 2 control points that control the curvature. And how we use this is very much like how we saw in the automotive industry. It's used in a very piecewise fashion. We chain these together to then talk about the outline description. And I say outline description because when we chain these outline segments together, that's actually not outline. This is math. That what we see here on the screen is actually a representation of that math. So this, to me, is a subset of outline. And so as we apply it to the square cap S, if we were to redraw this, right, I come with this idea of the square cap S, and I say I'm gonna draw it this way, then my focus isn't on the form in a holistic fashion, in the same way that if I were to use that as a pen. Instead, it's on each point that I'm making. And so my focus becomes very narrow on each portion of this outline description. And from a temporal aspect, this can take probably something like 10, 12, 15, 20 minutes to make. All the while, I'm focused only on these individual points. And I'm even further removed from form, which means that this illusion of form, if I'm going to do this correctly, means that I have to have even a stronger idea to bring into this process. So this is a larger burden for me. This is what the tool, this is what the tool would look like in relation to the outline description. So as you can see, it doesn't really have any relationship to it. When we work in this kind of paradigm, this is a very focused, very precise paradigm, we see that we are given greater freedom, which sounds very liberating. But in fact, in some cases, for complex form, this can become kind of a burden. Because if we look at the amount of possible manipulation of this kind of form, we can see that actually there are 49 different aspects to control in this form. So if I'm going to make this illusion, 49 different aspects of this outline description. So if I'm going to make the illusion of form successful here, then I have a lot to deal with, because each one of these points slightly controls the point around it, which I think is why in some certain outline descriptions of type form that we can see, sometimes they look a bit wobbly. We may not know why, and I think it has to do with this very piecewise way of looking at developing type form through outline description. So now we go into the font editor, and we see the effects that it has, the additional burden that we may have in describing type forms through outline description. Well, now in the environment of the font editor, it can be tempting to streamline and reduce that burden through the options that this narrow tool, which is the font editor, now presents us. And so because this tool is so readily accessible, I think it can be tempting to use that as the go-to tool to clear our minds and make things a lot easier. So here's a quote from the American philosopher Abraham Kaplan talking about a specific phenomenon. You may know it as the golden hammer. He had called it at the time the law of the instrument, which basically, he says, give a small boy a hammer, and it turns out that everything he encounters needs pounding, which I think, goes to the point that if this tool is so freely available and it's familiar, then you may overuse it to solve your problems. And the other effect of the font editor is that there's no sketching tools. The entire aspect of the design process that involves sketching, which is very volatile, it's messy, we may not have the answers, it's something we can't really deduce, which this actually falls outside the paradigm of the current font editor. And there are no form-making tools. As I've said before, the font editor, the drawing aspect of it is all based on the outline segment. There's no form expressed. So what's the effect of this, of these two, the effects of the Bezier curves and the effects of the editors? It's that design problems are quickly seen, or can become treated as development problems through the paradigm of these two together. And I think what this does is it cheats the designer out of developing their ideas in a very natural manner, and instead encourages them to funnel their ideas through this narrow paradigm. The effect of computer and technology on design, the discussion of that is nothing new. The designer Paul Rand talks about this in the 90s, about the computer and design, specifically on design education. So with this, normalization of our ideas are encouraged. And if one designer has the same environment as another one, and they're presented with the same options, the same plugins, the same defaults, then as the other ones, these have an impact on their design through expediency, then that appears to me logical that then that has a huge impact on the similarity of design amidst the community. And again, yes, this struggle for form and ideas is bypassed. So I hope can make the argument that, well, I hope I've made the argument that in their current instance, font editors don't really work with form. From the history of the Bezier curve and the way they treat it now, yeah, form can't be sufficiently expressed in all digital workflows. So, so as I see it, you have to address form. If we're talking about type forms, then you need to work with form-making tools. You have to have a strong experience and strong ideas to be able to bring that into such a low-level paradigm of working. And I think if you're only limited to the Bezier curve in the font editor in that particular paradigm, then I think that you're only allowed to come up with a range of ideas that are compatible with that tool. So here's one description of the design process in which you have this elaboration phase in which you try to generate as many ideas as possible, a very wide range, and then what you do is you reduce them later. But what I'm saying is that in the precise paradigm of the font editor, you only have a very narrow scope of designs to come from. What that means is, I think you come up with either very similar ideas, or because you can only generate a few ideas, you're less likely to remove the ideas you've generated. So what I think is necessary is for designers is to consciously decide the role of font editors in defining glyph shapes. I think in some of the marketing, we're implicitly being sold that these tools solve all of our problems. But I think what we need to do is consciously define how this tool will be used in our design process. One is to use it just as an outline segment tool, except that this paradigm is very limited, and either embrace that in seeing how your ideas are generated, or through experience, bring your ideas into that and be able to like I said, make this illusion of form through this paradigm. We could also just keep it as a translation tool, develop our ideas, our forms elsewhere, and then when we want to turn this into type, then we can use these as scanning and touching up tools. Or we can use these as what I think we're implicitly being sold, more or less. The idea that this can be a proper design tool, but this requires the authors of these tools to become more involved, because as we see that while these tools are progressing in a development standard, development-wise, they haven't progressed at all design-wise. So currently, the only application that allows us to draw forms with brushes, that accepts input through tablets, that allows us to draw black and white together, allows us to make touch-ups with the pen, that gives us a variety of brushes, that draws them accurately so that when we draw, they're not suddenly shifted. The only application that does that currently is Illustrator. But I was encouraged 2 days ago when I saw Malou's presentation, in which he talked about this plugin for glyphs in which you could start drawing in black and white. So I think that's a great start. So why is this all important? I think this is good if to keep this in mind, so that the designer can become aware in the design process that actually good software, efficient software, where all the points are in the right places and the file size is small, these are great, but they're only a portion of it, and that these are the means and not the end. That actually the end is good typography. And also, it's important to keep in mind that font editors and Bezier curves, and essentially any tool, right, the pen as well, that the tools and methods can support our design ideas, or that they can undermine them. And I think that's That's important that we keep in mind. Thank you.